Hello, everyone. Greetings to you all around the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good middle of the night for some of you, I think, looking at the places that you're all dialing in from. I am thrilled to be joined today by my uh, brilliant colleagues, Professor Fiona Murray and Dr. Philip Budden. Phil and Fiona, as I think everybody watching this webinar will probably already know, are not only, top of the game researchers and have a book out that is, I think, required reading for anybody who really wants to think about, understand, and apply innovation in their work and their organization. They both teach extensively in our executive education programs, and I am delighted that they have come here to join us today to talk about innovation in the age of AI. And we've also asked them to share a little bit more of the behind the scenes thinking for their upcoming Innovation Executive Academy course that is going to be running this summer. And we'll tell you a bit more about that at the end. As Elaine explained, we intend these to be very interactive. So thank you for already saying hello in the chat as this session goes on. Please feel free to add any thoughts and comments that you'd like to share with us and with each other in the chat. But if there's anything which really surfaces in your mind as a question that you'd like to put to Phil and to Fiona after they've provided some opening remarks and thoughts, then please do use the question tab for that. That will help me to sort through and help Fiona and Phil to answer as many of your questions as we can. So with that, I would like to hand over the stage, as it were, virtually to Phil and Fiona. I believe that you are going to make a short presentation and have something of a conversation with each other to start with. So I will disappear for a little while that goes on, but I will be watching carefully the questions that you're all hopefully asking from around the world, and we'll come back and help put those questions to Phil and to Fiona in a few minutes. So with that, Phil, Fiona, welcome. Thank you for being here, and over to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Peter, for that very much. It's wonderful to be back with my co-author and colleague, Professor Fiona Murray. I'll give her a moment to introduce herself, but I am Dr. Phil Budden here at MIT. I'm a senior lecturer, and with Fiona, we have taught much about innovation. And as Peter said, we have got a book out. We're very excited to share with you some of our latest thinking ahead of the Innovation Academy that will be running in July, just after the 4th of July. But Fiona, as I pull up my slides, do you want to say your few words of introduction?
Yes, absolutely. And welcome everybody. I mean, what a delight to see all of you in the chat and to recognize that you're joining us from all over the world. I'm actually sitting here on this very, very beautiful day in Greater Boston on the MIT campus. Occasionally you'll hear noise in my background, which is just the train going past. But really, what a pleasure to be talking to you about innovation in this age of AI. I have, as Phil said, had the opportunity to work with him for many years now. We advise large organizations, both public and private sector, on how to be more innovative, how to build out their innovation strategy, but also how to tap into innovation ecosystems around the world to really identify some of the most important projects. My own interests tend to be about how we innovate right at the frontier, including in AI, but also how we use really effective tools and what we can learn from venture capital and from the sort of startup economies that we see around us. But Phil, with that, back over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Fiona. So innovation in this age of AI, we have long taught about innovation here at MIT, studying the way it happens, drawing on the MIT definition from its innovation initiative. Before I dive into that definition here, I would just say it's been interesting. We've been teaching about innovation and coming technologies for 10, 15 years. And until about 5 years ago, AI was always one of those things that was on the horizon. And we were teaching people about how to think about innovation in the age before this applicable AI. But now AI is very much with us. And so those who were following along were better prepared for the AI that came about, including the generative AI tools from November 2022. And it's been fascinating watching the process that actually the practice of innovation has also been enhanced by AI, as well as it changing the technology frontier. So we believe the innovation has stood the test of time. The MIT definition is the 8 words, the process of taking ideas from inception to impact. Process, because it's not a singular moment, especially in large organizations. And we often spend time working with large organizations in both the public and private sectors. How do they adapt to the emerging technologies? How do they actually create innovation that leads to impact? That's our second term. Many places just call it profits, and profits, making more money than you spend is definitely a form of impact. But many of the organizations we work with also have wider definitions of impact, and we think that's increasingly the case. And then an idea, what is an idea? We see it as a match between a problem and a solution. And the solution bucket is often full of technology. So in many ways, AI, by which most people mean generative AI and maybe a little agentic AI, is a new tech solution. So just like all the prior waves of tech innovation that we've been talking about, it's important to adjust to this exciting new wave of AI tech, but to think about how it actually can be harnessed for innovation in organizations, both small and large. So Fiona, as we extrapolate beyond our working definition of innovation, you had some thoughts about how AI can specifically help this process.
Absolutely. And so I think, it's really important to ask as we talk about innovation is what does it really mean to have AI as part of an innovation strategy, right? And so we think about innovation as something that delivers value for our organizations, for the customers, for the end users that really matter to us. I think that there's some really important sense that we're not only trying to create greater efficiency in our organizations and huge amounts of opportunity to do that. And there's a thin line between efficiency on the one hand and really innovation and all the impact that can generate. And so as I sort of try to take apart this definition and say, okay, so what is the role of AI in any element of our definition of innovation? AI can be really, really relevant in this entire process of taking ideas from inception to impact. If this is a process, as Phil said, it's a journey, right? It's a journey that, as we'll see, starts from sort of exploration and takes some ideas all the way through to sort of scaling and really significant value creation. And AI, as we'll talk about in a little bit, can absolutely support you in that process, right? That's a process that your organization can lead and manage. And you as leaders and managers can use a set of tools and need to think through the set of tools that you absolutely want to use. They can allow you to explore wider sort of idea spaces, be more creative, but they can also help you triage and evaluate among different options. And so we really want to talk about and understand the different ways in which AI tools can support your innovation processes. They don't substitute for those processes, but they can be massively supporting and expanding of the opportunity space. But we're also interested in impact, and Phil's exactly right when he says, this is more than just profit, right? We want to think about what are the impacts that we care about. Of course, we might care about increasing value to our customer, and that might bring us, greater revenues, hopefully greater profitability. It might also allow, for example, for impact. It might make our hospitals more efficient. It might allow a doctor to be more efficient on his or her, in surgery, or make better diagnostic decisions. It might allow people worrying about cybersecurity to be more able to evaluate threats, for example. And so we see AI as well as part of bringing new kinds of impact. It'll allow us to really deliver more impact. And how can it do that? Well, AI, as Phil said, is part of the solution, right? If we can incorporate AI into our solutions, then those solutions may be much, much more effective. I think about the way in which it can massively shift our understanding of customers and customer needs, help our sales forces orient themselves and so on. So it can help us with internal solutions, but can absolutely be part of solutions that we're generating and delivering to our customers. But it also shapes the problem space, right? So with the genesis of AI comes a whole bunch of new and interesting problems and challenges. And so really trying to understand how do we solve, for example, the data problem? Right? We all have enormous amounts of data in our organizations that we want to render into something much, much more useful and transformative. And so we need to sort of think about AI on both sides of the problem solution match. And that's going to be an important part of how we think about adoption in our organizations and driving our innovation strategy. And lastly, we see innovation in many places. We see it across geographies. So we know very well that innovation is not just happening in Silicon Valley. The hyperscalers might be out on the West Coast of the United States, but we see tremendous numbers of startup companies offering up new, different, innovative AI-based solutions. But we also see organizations around the world being able to tap into that broader solution space and the ability to connect up to universities such as our own and elsewhere to really sort of drive that process well beyond the boundaries of our organization. And so we really see AI as a powerful driver of innovation, but it's absolutely still up to managers and leaders to decide where and how. And a lot of what we talk about is how not to get overwhelmed by this enormously wide sort of set of problems and solutions that are enabled. And I think many of the tools and methods that Phil, I think you'll take over and talk about, really help us understand what I think is a hugely abundant set of possibilities, and to some extent so abundant that they're really pretty overwhelming. And a lot of our Innovation Academy work is to try and get a sort of a grip on that and a real focus. Thank you.
Very well said. And just picking up on that geography point, seeing what an international group we have joining us live today. And I know this is also going to go out as a recording, so those listening later may be from varieties of corners of the world as well. One of the interesting things about this innovation of this wave of tech innovation through AI, how is it really can be used as an opportunity around the world. Just as we saw with previous ways of technology. And so thinking about how it can be used in your particular setting, your particular part of the world is very important. So one of the models we often use when we talk about innovation is we see it as being on a spectrum of efforts from BAU, business as usual, in the bottom left-hand corner of the problem solution matrix, where it's low novelty on either side, and then looking out to the far horizon of innovation. Now, once upon a time, 3 years ago, we used to think about AI, generative and agentic, being out there at the frontier. Now they're very much part of our business as usual. They're very much challenges that you as leaders and executives out there need to be grappling with. And so we think it's important to think about what you can do out at the far horizon. Some people talk about there being a bit of a jagged frontier for some of these cutting edge foundational types of AI. And there's innovation that can be done right out there at the frontier. But there's also little I innovation where now familiar types of AI can be applied to business as usual. So the model we've long used, looking out at the frontier, can be very useful here as you think about the scale of your innovation effort and therefore the degree of novelty and therefore risk that you are taking forwards with your AI model. So many players in the wider ecosystem that Fiona mentioned will be operating out at that far frontier. Computer scientists, university researchers, startups and spin-outs may be operating out at that far frontier of innovation, aiming for what we would call big I innovation, sort of 10x transformation. They often have to call it 10x to get funded by the venture capitalists, but it gives you a sense of the scale of what they're trying to achieve. But now that these types of AI are with us, it's very important for all organizations to be working out how can they use it, not just the frontier models, but now the models that are going to affect our business as usual. And this is where the concept of little I innovation, more modest efforts at adopting AI into your business can be useful, and particularly with lower risk, sort of 10% efforts. And the figure on the right, both of these are taken from our book, and everybody who attends our academy in July will get a free copy of the book, signed by both of us. We sort of start to spread it out with the different areas of novelty. And so understanding where you're trying to innovate is really important, even before you decide which type of AI as a tech solution you might want to bring into bear. So let me draw a breath there and see if Fiona wants to jump in on either of these foundational images that we use to give people a sense that innovation efforts really are on a spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there's a really nice example, right, that we can take from AI itself, which you've already alluded to, which is, we think about the what are literally known as the frontier labs, right? Who are the organizations like OpenAI and others who are absolutely out at the frontier driving that next generation of large language models. On the other hand, so they're generating these solutions that then get adopted by our organizations in a whole variety of ways. So we are then, as organizations, sort of pulling these back in and saying, look, we don't actually have to, we're innovating in the use of the solution, less than the solution itself. And so that allows us to have some projects that are sort of right in that in between, that really valuable sort of middle space, the sort of middle eye between these small incremental projects and the really big eye innovation. So that's a nice example of where simultaneously we've got the frontier labs literally doing big eye at the frontier. We've got our own organizations perhaps starting with little eye innovation, trying to use these things really creatively. And then some really intriguing companies. I'm just about to put this in the chat, which is even a local example. If we stand outside the building here, there's a fascinating company called Lila AI, which is trying to build a sort of scientific sort of language model to really try and sort of seamlessly experiment in science and both the life sciences and also coming up with new materials. And that's sort of quite transformative. And so they're definitely across these different spectrums, sort of transforming tried and trusted problems, which is how do we design new medicines with some really new kinds of toolkits. And so what I'm really interested in is the fact that we do see this absolutely, Phil, as you say, across the piece. But this is not just about AI. We see this with lots of other sort of frontier technologies. It won't be very long, I don't believe, until some of the work in quantum computing that at the moment seems almost like science fiction is becoming science fact and is starting to really penetrate the use in some of users like banks and others. So we see this very much, I think, as a dynamic frontier. It's really in motion. And I'm not sure that is something we used to talk about, but we really see that happening in real time at the moment.
No, that's a great way to put it. And thanks for sharing that link. Fiona, as you can tell, is very well connected with the ecosystem. One of the things with this model, and we're teaching this in the age of current agentic and generative AI, we think it's a model that stood the test of time with other ways of tech innovation. As Fiona says, quantum technology may look like it's beyond the far frontier, just like AI used to be 3 years ago. And yet these things are coming at us very quickly, accelerated by AI. So we think this model will be useful for you, not just for the immediate crunch, but for upcoming waves. So you can think about how best to position yourself with a variety of different technologies that are coming through. Another term we often use is that of the portfolio. And with an organization, whether it was trying to adapt to the innovation that was enhanced by the cloud or big data or getting on the internet over the last 15, 20 years, we now see that companies also need to think about what are they doing with AI. So the portfolio image on the right is just a rough diagram where we encourage people in large organizations or small ones to work out where are their innovation efforts in these particular areas. As Fiona says, some of the local ecosystem players really are at the far frontier, either working at frontier models of AI or even beyond into other emerging technologies like quantum. And so thinking about realistically where your organization is in this space, because the invention of the technologies is only part of the challenge. It's how you adapt your organization to the coming challenges. Now, Fiona, you've been a big proponent of taking a portfolio approach. You've seen this in the private sector. You've seen this with a lot of your cutting edge organizations. So I wanted to give you a chance to come in on our portfolio image here as we encourage those who are going to lead for innovation, in this case, in the age of AI, to think about where their efforts are going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think if I walk in the door of any large organization who are really focused on driving innovation, technological change, and into all of their activities, what I see is coming through either the head of R&D, the chief technology officer, is a really clear sense of how resources are allocated against different innovation projects. And that ability to sort of ask the question, does the way in which we're allocating our resources to the set of projects that we're spending time and money on really match our strategy? And organizations that need work, need help. What we see is the strategy might be, we're going to, transform our business. And yet there are very, very few projects out at that frontier. They're mostly very incremental projects. And unless you really believe you can be transformative through sort of 1,000 tiny steps, then there's probably a little bit of a misallocation of resources. On the other hand, some organizations will say we are sort of in a continuous improvement mode, but somewhere they've got a gigantic sort of big future technology bet or the single bet. And so trying to really have organizations recognize that the portfolio is, in a sense, the daily reality. It's the manifestation of their actual strategy, even if those two things don't match. A bit like if I tell you, my strategy is to run the marathon in Boston next Monday. But if you look in my diary and I've never been for a run, that doesn't seem, my allocation of time does not actually meet my strategic goal. It's the same thing. And so really well run organizations take a portfolio view. And many people say to me, is there a balanced portfolio? What should it look like? My answer is, look, your portfolio needs to reflect your strategic vision and your strategic goals. We see governments really struggling, government departments with this. If I can take an example from defense, which is an area that Phil, you and I both work on together and so on, defense departments say they intend to spend more and they want to spend more, and they're going to do it focused on novel technologies, new autonomous technologies that will really transform the nature of defense and security. And yet, when you actually look at their portfolio, they're largely spending it on 2 decades old sort of bits of metal. And so then you have to say there's a sort of mismatch. And so what we try to encourage organizations to do is to really sort of think about their portfolio carefully. Venture capitalists are another group I spend a lot of time with, and they think really carefully about their portfolio of the businesses that they invest in. Now, they like to take a lot of risk because they assume that as we go out towards the frontier, these projects get more risky. There's way more tech solution novelty and massively more problem novelty out at that frontier. And so they want to take those big bets. They'll have a portfolio of big bets, knowing that only maybe 1 in 10 of them will really be tremendously successful. And they pretty ruthlessly cull the others. And that stop-go decision is also really important as part of portfolio management and cultivation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, including the marathon analogy.
Yes, which is quite funny, isn't it, really?
That's very timely. And so as we pivot off of this, many of you may see people in your organization doing things with AI. The organizations that do best are going to be the ones that follow traditional innovation strategies and are cognizant of all the ways they're experimenting with AI, managing the risks of the different programs, and then deciding which are the winning applications of AI. And that's why we encourage people in this exciting time of AI to apply the traditional portfolio approach. Now, the other key concept we talk about once you've decided on a particular set of projects you're going to run through is how do you actually pull them through the various stages of innovation to impact? And we see this as applicable to AI in the software world as it is to other technologies we've seen out there. So we have long taught, and it's in our book, that there are a series of stages through which innovation needs to go, whether it's internal to your organization with your own innovation system, or we see this in the wild of the external ecosystem. Different people will have different titles. For the book, we've chosen 4 phases where you go through exploring, validating, accelerating, and scaling. And the key thing here is this tried and tested approach to getting innovation projects from a large number of small funded ones at the beginning, pulled through to impact for your organization, is often where exciting emerging technologies come unstuck and don't deliver innovation that leads to impact. So Fiona, this is an image we have taken from an upcoming toolkit being produced by the MIT Sloan Management Review, much more colorful than the one in the book. But do you want to come in here and say something about the importance of this pipeline of stages and perhaps how AI can help as we take things pulling through to impact?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it's if we take sort of one of these blobs, right? So imagine one of these sort of balls coming through, which is just a representation of a project. For any given project that any of us are focused on, we really sort of start by asking the question, we're exploring, is there a problem that we really want to solve and we're exploring solution space? Or do we have a solution and we're wondering what on earth to do with it? We really think that makes sense, then we might move to the next phase. And this next, what we would think of, as Phil said, is these experimentation cycles, these sort of innovative cycles of experimentation. And then we want to validate that idea. Can we test the hypothesis that our customers might find this interesting? Can we get some information that either confirms or frankly says, no, really, you're wrong? So we don't want to get into confirmation bias, but what do? If we then really believe that something is promising, then hopefully these the representation, the balls get bigger, that means more resources. We'll put more resources to bear on our project. We may raise more external capital, and we'll really try to accelerate through that next phase, generating evidence that this is successful, showing that something can be done at scale, showing that there's a pilot, and so on. And so it really is that sort of, for any given project, we want to go through these phases and cycles. In a large organization, you're probably going to be doing this for a set of projects, right? So you've got a portfolio and you're trying to pull that portfolio through, but we've only got finite resources. And so at each stage, we have to stop some projects and push more resources into the next one. One of the most interesting things I think today about some key AI tools is how those tools can actually help with exploration, with validation, with acceleration and scaling. So just to give you a few examples, right? Well, as we try to explore potentially novel ideas that might serve our customers, we can derive insights into what our customers might need by using unstructured data and really sort of taking a lot of unstructured data and doing interesting things with it. There's some brilliant work that, for example, Starbucks is doing in something called Deep Brew, which I quite like, which is just an example of using customer insights to try to, really explore solutions for customers in new and interesting ways. And that's just one of an entire wealth of examples. In the validation stage, right? So when we try to validate a particular idea, a project, a problem solution match, we've often got to show that this can be economically viable. This is particularly true in areas of deep tech that I work in, when we say, could we imagine being able to develop this solution at a good economic cost that is going to meet the price requirements of very demanding customers who may not be willing to pay much of a price premium. And there's some really interesting work that our colleague Paul McDonough-Smith has done in building what we call techno-economic models for these kinds of ideas. And he's done that with NASA to show that something that used to take people months can actually be done really quickly with some quite clever AI methodology. What about acceleration? The acceleration phase is often about designing pilot plants, designing a supply chain, maybe a customer value chain. And we've seen really interesting use of AI to kind of optimize learning, experimental design, pilot plant design even. And I've seen lots of deep tech ventures use this to really help them build out. Sometimes they would call this using a digital twin, so they don't have to build something if they can simulate it now using some of these tools and methods. And then lastly, what about scaling? And I will tell you that I have talked to some entrepreneurs recently who, as they try to scale, they want to go out into the capital markets like venture capital. And they've run almost their entire fundraising process using an agentic AI sort of system that they've built to help them identify investors, build their data room. It's pretty extraordinary what you can start to do if you're willing to experiment. Some things you can do more easily as a lone entrepreneur it's much harder to run in a big organization, but we really want to open the aperture of the way the AI can support the innovation process, but also recognize it has its downsides, right? And I think, Phil, you've talked a little bit about that in the work and around exploration that you have sort of thought about, and some of the insights from our colleague Hal Gregerson, I think.
Definitely. One of the great things is with this pipeline, it's clearly in stages. AI can support decision making, but you probably don't want to turn it completely over. If we just double click on the Explore session in the last running of the Innovation Academy, it was wonderful to have our friend and colleague Hal Gregerson open up. You'll probably know his work from Innovators DNA with Clay Christensen, that actually you can use AI as a tool to help you with that early stage of creative exploration, discovering, some call it ideation. And so for people like me, it can be very helpful to use an AI tool to actually help us to be more creative and expand the problem solution space that we're looking at. Fiona has mentioned a variety of other tools that you can use along the way, but we're hoping to get Hal back for our next running of the Academy, because it can really help people to understand how these tools can help with early stage creativity, but then with the discipline of actually taking the ideas through and delivering them at the far end. And so Fiona's done much in deep tech. I've been working more with entrepreneurs and students who are looking at just principally in digital software world. It turns out that there are a variety of software tools out there that can help you at different stages, and some of them actually help you with end-to-end pull through, So there are many that can capture the sort of creativity and the upvoting, downvoting. But there are others, as Fiona was saying, for deep tech, can also help you with the sort of balanced analysis and due diligence as you get to each of those stop-go decisions. We encourage the humans to remain in the loop on those stop-go decisions, because at the end of the day, they need to land these innovation projects in large, complex organizations. But Fiona, perhaps I can tempt you in on some of the ways you've seen people helping at these various stop-go stage gates and using AI to help them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, if you're in an organization that is lucky enough, in a way, to have a sort of a wealth of ideas at that exploration phase, it can be really overwhelming to decide how to select. I mean, we have this wonderful opportunity every year to work with our 130 something executive MBA students who all pitch different ideas and then they vote and so on. And we've been sort of tinkering around with the idea of the students will vote on the ideas they like the best, but could you use AI tools to help you automate that? Or what would you learn if you tried to use a set of tools on perhaps prior investment decisions that you made, to help you triage from a very large number of exploratory ideas? People are submitting sort of one pages or little videos and so on. Now, we know from hiring, where this has been used much more widely, that we have to be incredibly careful about the bias that is built into these systems. But I think that shouldn't stop us from using it. It just means we have to do it in a very thoughtful fashion. A little bit further along, perhaps we can use AI to help us with this sort of stop-go decision and triage to the next stage. As we start to validate ideas, particularly in areas, for example, that are very IP rich, we can use some AI tools to really help map and validate intellectual property portfolios, evaluate how strong they are and so on, to really, again, help us as input into a stop-go decision. Again, I'm not actually an advocate of us completely sort of outsourcing decision-making to a system that we don't really fully understand. But I think it can be incredibly useful in providing systematic information across a set of possible project choices. And then lastly, and Phil, you and I were just talking about this, if you think about your entire sort of portfolio and how you're trying to sort of follow along a lot of projects along a pipeline, there are a whole variety of sort of deal pipeline tools, many of which have been generated for the venture capital industry, and that can be used to track projects against milestones as they get accelerated. And I think just thinking carefully about how we use that inside large organizations, just to bring some structure to what is otherwise very messy process, I think can be helpful. Again, I see this as a sort of decision support, which may sound a bit boring and old-fashioned, but I think is a very useful way to think about this.
No, I think that's very helpful. And taking forwards innovation in a large organization is a challenge. And so we think AI tools can help organizations and those put in charge of innovation efforts to do so. Just picking up on the portfolio approach, as you've heard, there are various examples from the frontier of the wild of the ecosystem where different organizations, startups, universities, venture capital funds are doing things differently. So one of the other things that we see as still being valid is that there's a certain amount you can do inside your large organization, whether it's the government or the corporate on the left-hand side, but actually tapping into the other three players of the ecosystem. You can learn about some of their frontier activities. And there can be competitive advantage. If you see gaps in your portfolio, competitive advantage in getting to partner with some of those. And what we'd like to do in our in-person Innovation Academy is use the fact that we're in this ecosystem here to connect you with some of those partners. As we start to wrap up, and we'll turn ourselves back to Peter for any Q&A, we just want to say we've been writing about this for a while. There's the image of our book through Exec Ed. We've also put a lot of material out there for people to understand. We think the traditional corporate innovation mistakes are still the places that large organizations full of people and politics and limited resources are going to come unstuck. But in some ways, the AI tools with the innovation process and strategy can help them overcome some of those challenges. In support of the book, we are delighted that another part of Sloan is actually about to produce an SMR innovation toolkit. If you're interested, there's a link on the bottom right there that you can sign up, ready to be notified when this comes online. And this is going to be a great complement to the core work we do with Sloan Exec Ed. On that score, we have a couple of upcoming exec ed courses. There is the Innovation Executive Academy that Fiona and I will be running here at MIT in person in July, where we'll be bringing you some of those insights from how frontier organizations are really using AI to supercharge their efforts at innovation, including on AI. We have an available anytime self-paced online one called Accelerating Innovation Through Ecosystems. That sprint is one that you or your team can take to think about how can you fill the gaps in your portfolio by working outside of your organization. And then finally, in partnership with a wonderful Spanish business school, IESE, we have a global CEO program where innovation is one of the key elements that MIT brings to the table for that. So as we start to wrap up, I want to give Fiona a last chance to say anything as we turn over to Peter and any Q&A that has come in. And while we listen to Fiona, please also scan this to connect with Exec Ed on a variety of opportunities that have happened or are indeed coming up. But first, over to you, Fiona, for us to wrap up.
No, absolutely. I mean, Phil, first, thank you for leading the Innovation Academy, and I'm really pleased that this sort of evolving focus on how, in the broader context of innovation, whether it's leading individual projects, leading and managing the portfolio, and then tapping into the innovation ecosystem to really strengthen the portfolio, that each stage we can really think about AI as a source of opportunity, but also as a toolkit, if you like, to really help the internal management and leadership. And one of the things I've been engaging with folks in the chat about as we've gone along is the fact that, of course, with all these tools comes a set of limitations that we really have to be aware of. Anytime and I think we've learned the most about the use of these kinds of tools in hiring, but it's also some of those lessons apply to the innovation process, that the use of AI in particularly the exploratory phase or in triaging, choosing projects and things will sometimes narrow the scope to things that look an awful lot like what worked in the past. And so we sometimes need humans to help us be in the tails of the distribution. And so I think the trick here is to really think carefully about innovation, give it enough structure, use AI tools really well, and also see AI as very much part of the future solution space. So thanks for letting us bring that AI flavor into your academy.
Excellent. Well, you're very welcome. Now, Peter, I have not been following the questions while I've had my slides up. So over to you to what you think we should address for this group of participants.
We have been getting lots of questions as well as great interaction and ideas in the chat. So I'll try to synthesize a few of these. There's been a set, I think probably summed up by Alejandro, but having to do with how you're seeing this kind of innovation happening in particularly large companies. There's a lot of belief, perhaps that AI could be democratizing innovation, for want of a better way of describing it, and that lots of people throughout large organizations might be starting to innovate, and that's in contrast, perhaps, to more disciplined innovation kind of processes and resources in the past. And so people are curious what you're seeing in the companies that you're talking to and studying. Is there this sort of blossoming of a thousand flowers? How is that actually being managed in large organizations, which often haven't historically been able to move quickly these kinds of ways? So what are you seeing?
Well, first of all, that's a great question, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. It's interesting. In large organizations, which were already attempting innovation, through cloud and big data and getting more secure. It's interesting to see how they have dealt with AI. Often they've tried to have a central AI policy, which can take a while to happen, while others have gone for a let a thousand flowers bloom. One of the challenges for large organizations is knowing about those flowers that they are letting bloom. One of the benefits of the central innovation function, having a bit of a sense of what are the efforts out there, are both to safeguard the organization from inadvertently doing something wrong with AI, but also to learn the lessons. And I think it's really incumbent on large organizations to lean into the AI opportunity, and for those busy innovation and IT and AI teams to harness some of the AI tools out there so that they have a sense as what is their organization doing, what are they learning, and especially at a time when other organizations are going to be using AI to compete. So those are the main things that I've seen, and that's what we're going to have the academy focus on, is how do you achieve that right balance. But Fiona, I know you work with a lot of large organizations, both private sector and public sector. What are you seeing?
I mean, over the years, I have always seen people have a very strong desire to democratize innovation. I mean, I think when we talked about open innovation, any time this idea of democratizing innovation has been a really powerful sense. There's something really sort of important about that. And I believe that many of these tools, and we use the word AI, it's a very broad bucket, and so we probably want to think about what we really mean. I think the use of these tools for sort of daily productivity and productivity in our organizations, the fact that they are quite democratizing is really powerful. One thing I absolutely hope is that we all learn from one another. I mean, think of MIT as a large organization. We're obviously sort of producing the AI frontier in some parts of campus, and then in other parts of campus, and actually everybody in their daily lives, faculty, staff, we're all using it at different rates. And so we obviously have people who are sort of super users. And I think the real power comes in learning, so that one of my colleagues has thought of something, I can go and ask them, and I'm not afraid to say, how on earth did you do that? Where do I find Claude? Where is he hiding? And sort of breaking down the barriers to asking those questions. What I really think is important, though, for organizations to do, particularly when it comes to more sophisticated uses or when you really find something productivity enhancing, is to be willing to then sort of shut down some of those experiments and say, these are the two or three that we really think are effective, for example, in how our sales force uses these tools. So to be willing to let 1,000 flowers bloom and then sort of cultivate the garden reasonably aggressively at the right moment. And that, I think, is the important bit that sometimes sits a little uncomfortably with democratization, but the best organizations, I believe, do that really well.
Great, thank you. And sort of related to that question, again, I'm paraphrasing a few here, but are you seeing any differences between companies and or organizations that are AI driven or AI first in themselves and how they innovate versus how, again, presumably larger, but at least sort of existing companies approach innovation? Are they fundamentally different or are they quite similar?
So we see the phrase AI first being bandied around, just like a lot of people were going to be data first or internet first. So we like to look beyond that to what are they actually doing internally, and harnessing AI. This is not about sort of political democracy or not for profits. If they are a for-profit organization, they need to be harnessing AI that delivers tech solutions to business problems to paying customers. And so we think what's going to shake companies out here is not whether they get round to calling themselves AI first, but whether they actually adopt AI internally. Because every effort at AI, every 1,000 of those flowers requires time and investment. And so they need to be, as Fiona says, quite hard-headed in pruning to decide which are the ones that are actually showing value. But picking up on the horticultural metaphors and pruning, Fiona, what would you add to those who claim to be AI first?
I mean, the place that I've seen that really be quite powerful, there are some very, very interesting organizations out there who are starting to work with small businesses. And I noticed there was a question about the use of these tools by small businesses who've typically been sort of pencil and paper. And there are some really interesting organizations they look a little bit like traditional private equity, but instead of simply just sort of buying up and stripping assets out of these companies, they're saying, what do we come in with a set of typically quite small businesses and kind of overlay some of these more costly and complex tools to actually then allow a set of businesses to be much, much more efficient and productive, and then to use the individuals, the humans, the expertise differently. And I'm seeing that as a very interesting way of kind of doing a sort of an AI wrapper around a set of organizations, which allows them to become, let's call it AI first, but it's not all having to be generated from within, which I think is extremely challenging for small businesses. And so I've seen that. I've also seen organizations that are where if AI is and particularly some of the most sophisticated uses, the real source of your comparative advantage, you clearly will be building I think a lot of it comes down to your data and governance architecture. For most of us, we're having to put that in retrospectively. There's a really good question about how MIT and other organizations deal with data and governance. I think that is actually data, governance, security is a really big set of questions. And AI first often really does mean organizations who were built to enable that from the get-go. Any organization that's more than about 5 years old, it's almost impossible for that to be true, because you've got to strip it all out to start over again. And we are, most of us, trying to figure this out as we go along.
Great, thank you. And just conscious that we need to start wrapping up. We've in danger of running over slightly, but if I may ask one more question, which somebody did ask a version of as well. I'm thinking specifically about the Innovation Academy course that will next be running in July. Maybe a lot of people would think that you need to have innovation in your job title for something like that to be for you. But perhaps Phil and Fiona, you could share a bit about your perspectives on who gets a lot of value out of being in a course like that from in your experience.
Great question. And it was wonderful running in December. We had people who had innovation or ecosystem coordinator or R&D in their title. And we certainly enjoyed working with them, and they've stayed in touch and seem to have got great value. But equally, given that we're in the age of AI, AI is actually driving down the capability to innovate. And it's going to be a lot of the people who are in business units who are trying to work out how do they use AI effectively in their business units that I think will also benefit from the approaches we've set out. Innovation, if it's left to just the center, becomes potentially innovation theater, whereas people who are responsible for P&L business units can also value. And we're delighted to have a chance to run this academy. Fiona, I'm looking forward to having you at the academy as well. Would you like to add to that?
I mean, I think that you are exactly right, that there are a number of people who have sort of responsibilities for this and at these different levels in the organization. And so the way I think about this is, people who are absolutely on the forefront leading some of these really important innovation-driven focus projects, those managing at the portfolio level. And you may not think of yourselves as managing your innovation portfolio, but if you're managing a set of projects that are intended to drive value creation for your business unit, you might think of yourself that are driven by technology. You might think of yourself as a CTO for that business unit, or so on. This, I think, is very, very relevant for you, as well as the most senior leaders who think of themselves as, chief innovation officer, strategic focus. I mean, the titles don't always align with the words. And so I would say that if you're really focused on driving, creating value, particularly through your product, services, solutions in your organization, this is very much the place for you to come. And we're really looking forward to seeing you.
Great, thank you. On that note, I think it remains for me to first of all thank you, Fiona and Phil, for sharing really these very thoughtful and powerful ideas. I agree, having worked with you and followed your work for many years, that it's both timeless and current, which are a great combination, because there are a lot of places that people could see the latest fad or idea, but I think in the ideas that we hear about from the two of you in this presentation and in the other work that you do, your book, and of course your teaching in exec ed, that juxtaposition of the really tested ideas and the MIT philosophy of being practical and applied and impactful all are coming together. And I would encourage anyone who has found this conversation useful and valuable, which I suspect is everyone, to consider coming and spending some time with Phil and Fiona in their programs at the Sloan School, in person or online. There's a few options for doing that, and certainly go out and buy their book, because a lot of these ideas are very much encapsulated in that again. So thank you all, thank you to the team, and thank you mostly everyone around the world who joined us for this great conversation, for your attention and for your contributions. And we look forward to seeing many of you in future webinars and hopefully on campus or online in the not too distant future. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, participants out there in remote land.